You're listening to the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast, the show that proves no one stumbles upon success ever. With your host, Lou Need. Every Mondays and Thursdays, we deliver cold hard evidence behind the power of a robust morning routine. Get ready to be transformed by the renewal of your mind.
Hello, morning enthusiasts. Welcome to the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast. I am your host, Lunid Lewis, and today I have the honor of introducing a very special guest to the show. He is well sought out, and I've gone looking for him to bring him on the show because what he is about to discover and talk about today is going to be mind-blowing. I want to introduce to the show Paul Smith. Paul is one of the world's leading experts in business storytelling. He's one of Inc. magazine's top 100 leadership speakers of 2018, a storytelling coach, a best-selling author of the books Sell with a Story, Parenting with a Story, and Lead with a Story. Paul is also a former consultant at Accenture and former executive and 20-year veteran of the Procter & Gamble company. As part of his research, when he left the company 7 years ago on the effectiveness of storytelling, Paul has personally interviewed over 250 CEOs, executives, leaders, and salespeople in 25 countries. And he has been documenting over 2,000 individual stories. Leveraging those stories and interviews, Paul identified the components of effective storytelling and developed templates and tools to apply them on a daily basis. Paul, no further ado, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
It is my pleasure. I'm so excited to talk about storytelling because it is so key in business development. It is so key in business growth. Tell us about your background and what led you to storytelling.
Yeah, well, I have a pretty typical corporate background before I did what I do now. Like you mentioned, 20 years at Procter & Gamble. But I guess along the way, I just got fascinated with this concept of storytelling because I noticed that the leaders that I admired most had that skill and I wanted to have it. And I guess I was kind of frustrated because, they didn't teach me that in business school. They didn't teach me that when I joined the companies I worked for. So I kind of had to learn it on my own. And I read a bunch of books on it, still didn't know how to do it. And I started interviewing all these leaders that you'd mentioned. I think I'm over 300 now. These are one-on-one, face-to-face, 2-hour-long, sit-down conversations. And that, of course, led me to all that research, of course, has allowed me to kind of reverse engineer my way into what works in storytelling and what doesn't. And that, of course, that led to the first book that I wrote on the topic. I guess I eventually realized that if I wanted to know this that badly, probably other people did as well. And so it stopped being my own little personal learning journey and became an idea for a book. And that's what led to the first book and the second book. And it all kind of changed my career trajectory. But it started just with an interest and a fascination with storytelling.
Yeah, and we are all grateful that you embarked on this journey. It's almost like Napoleon Hill. Remember Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah, exactly.
It took him 20 years. He goes out and interviews all these people on the principle of success. And then here you did the same thing in interviewing all these executives and leaders on how to effectively tell a great story for business growth. To tap into the emotions of their, not just their employees, but their customers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's exactly right.
So tell us, what is effective storytelling?
Yeah. So it's not just, making a good speech or writing a good memo or delivering a good presentation. I mean, those are important things as well. But, when I say, storytelling at work, so business storytelling, leadership storytelling, I literally mean telling stories, right? So narratives about something that happened to someone. So a good story is not just, look, Bob, there are 3 reasons why you need to buy my product. That's a sales pitch, right? Yep. It's not just, here's my recommendation on how we can improve our profits in the third quarter. Okay, that's going to be a list of recommendations. I'm talking about narratives, telling a narrative about something that happened to someone that is interesting and insightful and leads you to a lesson that's worthy of being learned, right? So real stories about real things that happen to real people. And what makes them effective is that there's a main character that your audience can relate to, and that they're facing a challenge that your audience might find relevant to their lives or their work. And that there's an honest struggle happening along the way. I mean, those are kind of the three main components of an effective story: a relatable main character facing a relevant challenge, and a worthy and honest struggle ensuing between them and whatever it is they're struggling with, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of Hollywood 101. So that's what I mean by storytelling, and that's kind of the basics of what would make one effective.
Yeah, and the effectiveness of the storytelling is a way to actually get people engaged, get their attention, right? Because people don't understand. They hear the facts, but that's boring. That taps into the logical brain.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, and you just hit on the main thing, the logical brain. So, I mean, that's one of the things we've learned from cognitive psychology in the last couple of decades is that it turns out humans don't make the logical, rational decisions that we like to think that we do. It turns out that our emotional subconscious brain is making many, if not most, of our decisions. And then our rational side of our brain justifies those decisions a few nanoseconds later. So we leave a decision thinking that we've made it for those logical, rational reasons. But the truth is our emotional brain made the decision for us, and we're just trying to catch up. So if you want to influence what people think and feel and do, it turns out you need to talk to the whole brain, not just one side or the other. And stories are just uniquely qualified to help you reach both sides of the brain, whereas your presentation and your memo and your sales pitch will typically only reach part of the brain.
Because we're emotional buyers as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm planning for a wedding now, and I realize, oh, wow, it is expensive. The whole industry is tapping into emotions. Exactly. This whole industry is built around tapping into your emotions and what love and that good feeling, right? Trying to get you to spend $10,000 on a venue.
Exactly. Well, A, congratulations on your upcoming wedding, and B, get ready for every single thing you want to be $1,000. Oh, you want extra flowers with that? Well, that's $1,000. Oh, you want hors d'oeuvres with that? Well, that's $1,000. Yeah. So good luck with that.
Oh, you want a chair? That's a $250.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. We've decided to keep it small. We were going to go big, and now we're doing an elopement package on the beach, and it's just going to be immediate family. We're keeping it simple.
Wow. Good for you. Good for you. Congrats.
Thank you. So it goes into, you have to, as you say, tap into the whole brain to help, because we're emotional buyers, we're emotional beings, and we have to connect with that. People want to connect with you as well. Mm-hmm. And that's a great way to do it, is with stories. And it could be stories of your own, but also I'm going to ask you as an expert, it could be stories of other people, right? Because, I'm limited on my stories.
Exactly. Yeah. In fact, most of the stories you tell should probably be about other people, right? Because, imagine if every story you told was about you. People would think you're an incredibly self-centered person, right?
Narcissistic, egoistic.
Yeah, you don't want to be that kind of leader. So clearly, most of your story should be about other people, and that's good because, like you said, there's a whole lot more other people in the world than there are of you. So they're more of a source for good stories. And some of your stories should be about you, of course, but of those that are, some of those should be your failure stories, right? They should be self-deprecating stories because, again, you don't want to just come across as a self-centered egomaniac that everything you ever did was awesome, because it's probably not.
And if it is of you, because I'm learning, I brought you on the show, Paul, because I needed to learn from you. I'm biased. And so if the story is of you, then it should be about the failure, the trial, and then the triumph, right? To close it up.
Yeah, but both, right? So you shouldn't just have success stories about you. Some of them should be your own failure stories. And not all of them, but definitely some of them. Okay.
So tell us about the structure of the story, the hook, context, challenge.
Yeah. So good stories have a structure. Bad stories don't. Bad stories are just rambling, run-on messes. They last too long. They don't, get to the point. So if you want a good story, you need to start with having a decent structure. And I used to teach kind of the more academic sounding parts of stories, like you kind of right off there, the context, challenge, conflict resolution. But what I found is that most of my clients, that kind of makes their eyes roll back in their head, and it's too abstract for them. So what I think is easier for people to wrap their minds around is there are 8 questions that your story needs to answer, and in a particular order. So here they are. First of all, why should I bother listening to the story? All right, you got to answer that question first in the first 10 or 15 seconds, or they might not listen to your story. So start with a hook, a reason why they should listen to your story. But once you've answered that, you've kind of earned the right to answer the next 5 questions. Where and when did it happen? Who's the main character and what did they want? What was the problem or opportunity they ran into? What did they do about it? And how did it turn out in the end? Right. Now that should sound like the natural flow of a story, because it is the natural flow of a story. But if you're keeping track, that's only 6. So there's 2 more. So the last 2 are, what did you learn? And what do you think I should go do now? I, the person listening to the story, right? So that's your opportunity to draw a conclusion and make a recommendation. So if you answer those 8 questions in that order, your story will come out in kind of the natural flow that a story should. And you'll make sure to draw a conclusion from the story, and you'll make sure that you've made a recommendation to make sure that they go do something different. Because you're probably in business, you're telling these stories for a reason, right? Not just to entertain people. Like you have an objective, right? So that's the structure of a well-told business story. And
so I got, why should I bother listening to the story? Where and when did it happen? And then you said, what happened?
Let's start over from the beginning. So why should I bother listening to the story? It's number 1. Number 2 is where and when did it happen? Number 3 is who's the main character and what did they want? Number 4 is what was the problem or opportunity they ran into? Number 5 is what did they do about it? Right? That's the action, the conflict in the story. Number 6 is how did it all turn out in the end? Right, which leaves the last 2, which is what was the lesson that you learned? And 8 is what do you think I should go do now? The recommendation.
Thank you for that outline. It's very concise, because we imagined when we were reading, our parents were reading us stories at a young age. That really just captivated us, and we wanted to know what happened. We want the good guy to triumph.
Exactly.
So for businesses who are looking to tell stories, how do they go about finding other people's stories? Because I know you have a book called not just Lead with Story. You have that one as well, but you have 10 stories that great leaders tell. Where can they go? Is it in your book that you have a list of different stories that they can use to integrate into their speech?
Yeah. So, and these stories, by the way, they're not just for speeches. They're for any conversation that you're having, whether it's in front of 1,000 people or in front of 1 person in your office or 2 people around the water cooler. But so the most recent book is the 10 stories great leaders tell. And it's obviously about the 10 most important stories I think leaders should tell. I think there are dozens of stories that leaders need to be able to tell, but I think there are some that are more important than others. So that's what the topic of the book is. And if you're interested, I can just tell you what the 10 are right now, if that's of interest.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So the first would be where we came from. In fact, the first 4 kind of go together because they're about setting direction for the organization. So here are those 4. Where we came from. So that's a founding story. Why we can't stay there. So that's a case for change story. Where we're going, which is a vision story, and how we're going to get there, which is a strategy story, right? Because strategy is about how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be. All right. So if you can tell those 4 stories, I think you're in a good position to get your organization to go where you want them to go. The next 4 go together as well, but they're more about who we are as an organization. So that's what we believe. So that's a corporate values and ethics story. Who we serve. So that's a customer story, a story about your customer. So everybody can understand, who your customer is on a visceral human level. What we do for our customers. So that's a classical sales story, a story about what you do that's so awesome. People should pay you money to do it. Right. And number 8 is how we're different from our competitors. So I call that a marketing story because marketing is generally about how you're different from your competitors, right? Which leaves 2 more, but the last 2, they go together as well, but they're more about you personally, the leader. So number 9 is why I lead the way I do. So that's a personal leadership philosophy story. And 10 is why you should want to work here. It's like not you, but you, whoever you're talking to, right? So that's a recruiting story because every leader's job is to get talented people to come join the organization and stay there. That's not just the job of the HR department, right? So those I think are the most important 10. So if you want to start with storytelling at work, those are probably the 10 places to start.
And in the book gives you guidelines on how to compose your own. Tailor it.
Yeah, exactly. So there's one example of each of those 10 stories, and then there are tips for how you can find your own story like that. Because of course, the example in the book is not yours. You can't use it. You need to use another one. But there are tips for you to how to find your own and then craft your own story like that.
This is interesting stuff because we struggle as communicators. Myself, as a communicator, I struggle with telling a story. I struggle.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. It's hard. And I go to church and it's oddly enough to this week's, we started a new series and it's about your story, how to use your story to tell people who you are, what God has done in your life so that you can inspire them. And for me, I've always noticed that when the story is being told, they make it short and sweet, 3 points. So, because people won't remember anything beyond that, right? And
right.
Do you agree with that strategy? And what's the best way to actually cultivate that?
Yeah. So, several things there I agree with. First of all, church is a great place to hear great stories. In fact, a number of the people that I interview for my book are pastors because they're particularly good at telling stories. In fact, one of the greatest storytellers of all time is Jesus in the parables in the Bible, right? So, that's one point. So another point you said, people should, if they're going to tell a story, kind of stick to 3 points because that's all that people can remember. If you're going to make a speech, stick with 3 points. If you're going to, write a memo, stick with 3 points because that's all that people remember. But when you're telling a story, it's typically 1. You're typically telling the story to draw one lesson out. You're going to answer 8 questions. You're going to say several things. You're going to use 2 or 3 minutes worth of words, but your main message is probably a single message. Now, there are some stories that you can learn several lessons from. So 2 or 3 or 4, I can see, and I have stories that you can learn multiple lessons from. But it's usually just 1. But don't think of a story as, okay, I want you to go do these following 3 things. Mm-hmm. So here's my story.
Yep.
Do the first thing. Do the second thing, do the third thing. That's not a story. That's just a list. That's a good piece of advice. So remember, there's a difference between telling stories and making a speech.
Okay, that's good to know. Key to remember that the storytelling process is it should be very engaging for the audience.
Yeah, and it will be engaging if you're actually telling a real story. In other words, again, a narrative about something that happened to someone, right? So if you want to make a point about X, tell a story about someone who did X, right? So, there was my girlfriend when we were in high school. She did that thing, and here are the consequences of it. That's a story. A lecture is you shouldn't do X because it's bad for you and you might go to jail or get pregnant or you might whatever, that's a lecture. A story is, let me tell you about my girlfriend and what she did and what happened to her.
Yeah. I personally love reading. I personally love stories, and I'm working on bettering my storytelling skills. For the people that you work with, what are some roadblocks that you have helped them overcome so that they get that aha moment and it becomes a lot easier to create story?
Well, I guess first of all is knowing what stories you want. So having a wish list of stories is the first roadblock to overcome, is not having a wish list. Like you'll never find stories if you don't know you're looking for them, right? Or it's hard to find stories if you don't know you're looking. So start out by making a list. And that's what that list of 10 stories is supposed to be, is your beginner's list of here are probably some of the stories you need. Now you need a lot more than that, but start with a list. And then literally shop that around with your colleagues at work, your boss, your direct reports, your peers. Here are the kind of stories I'm looking for right now. Do you have any? You'd be surprised how willing people are to share their stories when they know you're looking for one. So that's the biggest barrier is knowing what stories you're looking for and being bold enough to look for them, to ask people for help with them. I spend most of my time teaching leaders how to craft better stories, but the truth is that's kind of the easy part. The harder part is realizing what stories you need and finding them. Once you have them, getting the structure right, creating the right emotional engagement in the story, creating a surprise ending. To me, that stuff's easy. The hard part is starting with an important story to tell and having a good event to build that story around.
Crafting stories is easy. Listen to you.
Well, easier. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great skill to learn because it taps into marketing too, like how to get your potential customers and client to do business with you. It taps into all that, so it's very important. And for having a podcast or doing speeches and speaking events, you got to keep it innovative. Got to keep it creative when it comes to telling a story.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about storytelling with data. I know we can visualize the data. We can use it to tell a story. If the manager, the leader is directing the data correctly, they can get answers for business decisions. Tell us how to effectively tell stories with data.
Yeah. So when I say telling stories with data, what I don't mean is data visualization, which is a popular buzzword these days. And there are a lot of people who are much better at data visualization than I am. I'm making pretty charts and graphs that are very, understandable. That's not what I mean. When I say telling stories with data, when I teach people how to tell stories with data, I literally mean using the same storytelling techniques that you and I just talked about, right? This following the right structure, having an emotional engaging moment, having a surprise ending. You can literally use the same storytelling techniques that you use with words, but use them with data if you know how to do it. So for example, one of my favorite examples of this comes from a guy named Andrew Moorfield, who started an online bank back in the year 2000, which if you remember, that's right at the height of the .com bubble, which ended in the .com burst, you know. Anyway, so it was a startup company, and like many startup companies, there was times where he didn't have enough cash flow to make payroll. So when I was interviewing him for my first book, I was, when he got to that point of our conversation, he said, "Yeah, the first time I couldn't make payroll was the worst." I had to laugh because, if there was a first time you couldn't make payroll, that must mean there was a second and a third time. And it was so long ago that he could laugh about it now, so it was okay. So I asked him, well, what did you do about it? Like, what did you do when you realized you weren't going to have enough money to pay your people? And he said, and here's where the data storytelling comes in. He said, well, I pulled everybody into a conference room. I walked up to the whiteboard and I wrote a number at the top on the left. And I wrote a number at the top and I said, that was our bank account balance at the beginning of this month. And then he said, I wrote two other numbers underneath that with a plus and a minus. And I said, those are the revenues we expect to get this month. And those are the expenses that we'll have to pay to keep running the business during the month. And then he drew a line under it and he did the math and he wrote the answer at the bottom. And he circled that number. He said, so that's how much money we're going to have at the end of this month to pay your salaries. And like I said, he circled that number. So then over on the other side of the whiteboard, he wrote another number and he circled it. And he said, and that's how much money your salaries add up to. And he just stood there and let them take in the stark contrast between these two numbers, because the number on the right was 3 times the size of the number on the left. So their salaries were 3 times the size of the money he would have to pay it. And so he ended up having a conversation with them about, what should I do about this situation? Should I, pay everybody a third of their salary? By the way, they decided, no, we want you to pay a third of us all of our salary and 2/3 none. And by the way, they ended up helping him figure out who those people were. But the point is, if anybody ever told a story with 5 numbers it was Andrew Moorfield on that day, because, notice what he did. There was a beginning, a middle, and an end. He told the story of the bank account. And there was a surprise when people realized that the number on the right was 3 times the size of the number on the left. There was an emotional, moment when they realized, some of us are not going to get paid. And at the end, like a normal story, he let them draw the conclusion instead of him telling them what he was going to do. So if you follow the same techniques with data that you do with words, you actually can tell better stories with data than you can without.
I was thinking about the data visualization piece with the charts and the graphs.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that stuff's important too, but I wouldn't call that storytelling. I'd call that data visualization.
Yeah. Paul, tell us, how do you get up, dress up, and show up? What's your morning routine like?
So I saw that was your theme here, so I had to put some brain power behind that. So the biggest lessons I've learned, and I'm 52 now, so I've had a few years to think about morning routines. In my mid 30s, I made a pretty major change to my morning routine, and it really has paid off for me. And it was that I noticed that I was old enough to start having people working around me who were about to retire, and I asked them, "What are you looking forward to about retiring?" And almost everybody said the same thing. Not having to wake up with an alarm clock, right? That's like the worst part of everybody's day is when the alarm clock goes off and you hit snooze and you hit snooze again. And like you're too tired and you don't want to get up and you haven't had your coffee yet. And people just really look forward to the day where they just can wake up. And I thought, well, that's 30 years away from me.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be awesome if I could do that today without having to quit my job? And I thought, what would it take for me to not need an alarm clock? And the answer was pretty easy. Well, you need to go to bed earlier, dummy, right? So I went to bed like 30 minutes earlier, and I still needed an alarm clock. So then I went to bed 30 minutes earlier than that, and I didn't need an alarm clock. So it turned out for me, I needed to get up at 6 a.m. It turns out if I go to bed at 10 p.m., then I will wake up at 6 a.m. because my body will have had enough sleep. And if I want to set an emergency alarm for 6:15, that's fine. But I figured out just by trial and error that I will wake up every day at just about 6 o'clock if I go to bed at 10. And I will wake up completely refreshed with all the sleep I need and ready to start my day. And so I haven't used an alarm clock in 30 years, and it's wonderful. And the other thing I did was I started my exercise first thing in the morning instead of later in the day at lunch or after work. And part of that's because I realized if I don't exercise first thing in the morning, the odds that I will actually make time for it is much lower.
Slim.
Like I've always gotten, I'm too busy today, or I got home late or whatever. But if I do it first thing, well, I got nothing else to do.
Yeah.
So, and that led to a third benefit is I don't need morning coffee. Now, I don't particularly like coffee anyway, but the point is most people use coffee to get some caffeine so that they're wide awake by the time they get to work. Well, after I've had all my sleep that my body needs, and I've run 3 miles, I'm pretty awake. So I don't need caffeine. So therefore, I don't need to quit drinking coffee so those changes just radically changed my entire life, I think. And it all started with wanting to wake up at the right time.
Yeah. And the people that want to retire, looking forward to retire so they don't wake up with an alarm clock, it goes to show you that the lack of purpose, the lack of like that need where your dreams will wake you up. When you have something you're enthusiastic about or looking forward to work towards, you don't look forward to sleeping in.
Right. Yeah. That's a different point. I think a very good one is having an inspiring purpose, which I do now in my life now that I've left my corporate career and I'm an author and speaker, and I get to talk to interesting people like you. Yeah, I look forward to every day. But even when I had my, kind of normal corporate job, my day was so much better because I had all the sleep I need and I had my exercise.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing is the morning routine started the night before with you.
Yes, yeah, that's the point. The morning routine started the night before.
Yeah, it's planning because I was listening to Dr. Bruce Lapton, and he talks about the chemistry of the brain, how we need to sleep between 10 and we need to be in bed by 10 because that's where melatonin is at its highest. It's at its highest
there
peak.
You go.
Yeah, because we're connected to the sunlight, and so like after the sun sets, melatonin starts to increase in our system. And then at 10 p.m., if you hit the sack, you go to bed, you will get the benefits of the regenerating
Right.
sleep that you talked about, being refreshed in the morning, where you don't have to hit snooze. You're alert. You've taken care of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen.
So yeah, it's beautiful. And just like yourself, forget trying to fit or work out in during the day, trying to break for lunch, trying to do it after work, because by then you're missing all the benefits of doing it early in the morning. It's that jolt of awakeness that you experience, which is pretty fantastic. Because I too, my day does not start until I have done my morning routine. And exercise is one of them. And right after exercise is taking a cold shower.
Well, you're more bold than me with that, but
it's the last 3 minutes of the shower. You just run it cold because it helps with anxiety. It helps with depression. And, the ice, athletes jump in, bucket of ice because for recovery, but it helps with metabolism as well. So I do it. That's my coffee.
I'm sure that would wake anybody up.
Give you that alertness that you need throughout the day. So your morning routine stands true. And I remember talking to you a few months ago before trying to get you to come on the show, because I really wanted you on the show, Paul. And you were saying, well, my morning routine is not that, I don't really have one, but it's an epitome of a successful entrepreneur, what you just explained.
Yeah, you're right. I just had to think about it, and I guess I do, and it has been important.
Yeah, we forget. That's the beauty of the morning routine, or this show is like we don't stumble upon success. There are disciplines, there are habits that are put in place that actually led to your success. And it starts with the morning routine. It starts what you do with the first hour of your day. How do you prime yourself for the day? I mean, Warren Buffett reads, Oprah Winfrey's up at 4 a.m. journaling. Tony Robbins is dunking himself into a ice bucket of water.
Yeah. Well, I won't be doing that, but
but your morning routine is very inspiring because you didn't even know it was happening. It was just ingrained after 30 years.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about the importance of it, but I think you're right.
Yeah. It's really, really, really great that you share that with us. Paul, I want our listeners to connect with you. Tell us, where can we find you?
Yeah, thanks. Probably the best place is my website. Everything's there. So that's leadwithastory.com. So that's just the name of my first book. I guess I was never more creative about website naming after that. But leadwithastory.com.
Yes, and I will put that on the show notes. It has been a fantastic conversation with you, Paul. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
Yep, thank you.
You have a blessed day. Bye.
You too. Bye.
All right, morning enthusiasts, that's it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in. If you love the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast, we'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or Google Play. While you're at it, tell a friend about the show. Be sure to visit bestmorningroutineever.com and our Facebook group to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic free bonus content. Until next time,